Last year, 2019, in January, very first video of the year, 10 things you should know before you buy any e-bike. Had over 500,000 views last year, and thanks to everybody who watched that video and commented, liked, subscribed because of it. I'm back for a different version for 2020. So if you haven't seen that video, don't worry, you don't have to watch that one first and then this one. You can watch this one first. I'll put a link in the description at the end of the video too, so you can go watch that one as well. Now, in addition, of course, there's way more than 10 things you could know about e-bikes, but I wanted to hit the most important ones. So I decided to do some reflecting, and at the end of 2019, I thought about what are the most common questions I get asked about e-bikes now, and we should cover those. So here we go. I've got 8 things you should know before buying any e-bike. And instead of making them all surprise or hidden as I go throughout the video, they're all conveniently written on this whiteboard, and there are no surprises as far as the list of 8 things. Ignore that surprise box in the corner, that's for later. And don't forget to subscribe. There's a button in the corner of your screen over there. So let's jump right into it. Number 1 of 8 of things you should know. Batteries. In the last video I talked about batteries. I talked about watt hours, I talked about amp hours, I talked about voltage, and how you calculate those to figure out which one gets more range or less. And one thing I didn't really go into detail or discuss is, and this is a question that I'm getting a lot, is which voltage is best? And the answer is kind of, it depends on the bike, of course. There is no one best voltage. Let's just get that out of there right away. Higher voltage does not necessarily mean better, but it could. So let's explain that a little bit. If we have a 36 volt battery, typically that's what we see on lower powered bikes such as 250 or 350 watts. If you're going with lower voltage and a lower power, this makes sense. So if you have a 350 watt or less e-bike and it has a 36 volt battery, that makes sense. So we don't need to worry about that one anymore. Now here's where the common question gets in: 48 volt or 52 volts. Now if you go into 500 watt bikes, 750, 1000 watts, you'll see a lot of e-bikes with 48 volts. I would say this is probably the most common. However, there's a few companies out there saying, we've got a 52 volt battery. So which one of these is best? Is a 52 volt battery going to be faster on a bike than a 48 volt battery? Possibly. Maybe. Maybe not. So you can't just look at the voltage. You have to look at, well, what's the controller amperage with this voltage? How's the gearing set up on the bike? Is it a mid-drive? Is it a hub motor? All of those factors make a difference. So a 52 volt battery, in theory, would be faster than a 48 volt battery on the same exact e-bike. Now, pay attention to what I said there. So if you had the same motor, same controller, same wheel size, same everything, and switched a bike from 48 volts to 52 volts, then yes, the bike with 52 volts would go a little bit faster on the top end, and maybe give you just a little bit more power overall. However, that doesn't mean that every 52 volt bike is faster than every 48 volt bike. So just be aware, I do feel like there's some companies that are starting to kind of use this as a marketing tactic. It's kind of like the next thing, oh, this is the next best thing. But you do have to look at the overall package. So if you're comparing bikes, 48 or 52 volt, they're going to be very similar in performance. If everything else is identical, then yes, this one would have more power, but you have to look at the overall capacity. So just something you should be aware of. Yes, there are different voltages. 48 or 52, does it really matter? Maybe. I know that may not be the answer you're looking for, but I just want to tell people that, because I get this so often now, is a 48 or a 52 volt better? I can't answer that question. It's impossible. It depends on the rest of the components. So moving on, I've beat that enough. Fat tires. Why are fat tire bikes so popular? Why do people like to have wheels that are this big? They're monstrous, they're heavy, they must be slow, they must lose range, they must cause drag. Do they do those things? Well, yeah, to a certain degree they do. So why are we using them? Because they're more fun. E-bikes, I'm just gonna say it. A lot of people talk about e-bikes and how they're revolutionizing transportation. They're
Woo! Electric bikes, baby! They're the future!
Green technology, and all those things may be true and good. But the reason most people ride e-bikes is because they're fun. And a fat tire is more fun for a couple of reasons. One, you've got a wider contact patch with the road than a skinny tire, which, see, I just got fat tires everywhere around me. So that means if you're riding on a trail and it suddenly goes from sand to gravel to dirt to street, if you have fat tires, you can do that and you're not worried about it. You're just out there having fun and relaxed, and it doesn't matter. So there's one thing, you've got more traction, more stability. In theory, I think it's safer. Now, the other thing I said is gonna go back to the comfort, and I think this is an even bigger reason to go with a fat tire bike and why they make sense. You're running low pressure, high volume. So a normal mountain bike tire of this size might have 50 or 60 PSI. So that's the pressure, that's how hard the tire is gonna be, whereas a fat tire is only going to be maybe 20 PSI. So it's gonna be much softer, more forgiving, soak up more bumps, and that's why you don't always see suspension forks on fat tire bikes, because the tires absorb a lot of things on the road and in the trails, and so depending on the type of riding you do, it may not even be necessary. Now, are they heavier? Yes, a little bit. Do they slow the bike down? Maybe a little bit as well. Is it enough to notice on an e-bike? Generally speaking, no. Number 3, brakes. All this talk about motors and batteries and how fast do they go, and hardly anyone talks about how you stop the things. So there's a few different types of brakes on electric bikes and bicycles in general, and e-bikes kind of have a couple extra things. Usually what you see is something like this. This is a mechanical caliper for disc brakes. Most e-bikes will come with disc brakes already. The differences are going to be in the levers and the calipers specifically. So in a mechanical caliper, there is a steel cable that's running down to the caliper. You pull on the lever, that pulls the cable, that pulls this little guy right here, which generally speaking moves one pad in while the other one stays stationary. Now in something like this, I don't know if you can see it, but basically there's an adjustment knob that's to adjust the other side of the pad, and this one just pulls it in. Now, there's a disadvantage to this, that they require a little bit more adjustment, a little more often. It's harder to keep them tuned up because you're only pulling from one side. So as this side wears down, you need to be constantly adjusting it inward as you're going out for rides to keep your brakes working at their best performance. There are some really nice mechanical disc brakes out there. They've been out for a while, so don't get me wrong, hydraulics aren't necessarily always better than a mechanical brake, but the ones that most e-bikes come with are relatively inexpensive. This is usually kind of a low-hanging fruit item that you can upgrade and be safer and just stop better. So what are your options, or what are things you should look out for when you're buying a new bike? Now usually the question goes down to, does the bike have hydraulic brakes or mechanical? So here's an example of a hydraulic brake setup. So we have the lever here, and we have a hose that goes all the way to the caliper with mineral fluid in it, and the fluid going through is what's creating the stopping power at the pistons inside. and both pistons move evenly. So they come in from both sides. So as the brake pads wear down, they generally wear evenly. It's a little bit easier to keep a hydraulic brake tuned up, so to speak, because you're not having to make those little adjustments on a constant basis. Some people refer to them as self-adjusting, and eventually you will have to bleed the brakes, you will have to replace the pads. You're going to have to replace the pads on mechanical ones as well. So some people get scared off by the fact that you have to bleed the brakes, but if you've ever done it on a car or a motorcycle, it's very much the same process. It's not hard to do. So definitely something anybody can learn. Now, as far as brakes, there's one other thing. This is a question people ask. Do they have a cutoff switch? And on most e-bikes they do, and all they should. If they don't, I'd be a little concerned. So what does that mean? That means there's this extra cable dangling right here that would not be on a normal bicycle. This plugs into the motor controller, so when you squeeze this lever, it cuts off power to the motor. So you know if you're on the brakes, the motor's never going to run. Now that's a concern if you have mechanical disc brakes and you want to upgrade to hydraulic, because some standard hydraulic brakes are made for normal bicycles and they're not going to have that switch. Now I do make some, I have them available at boltonebikes.com for certain models of e-bikes, but what about everyone else? Well, we're just going to set this over here. So this is where we get into something that's in the middle, kind of a hybrid of the two. This is a mechanically actuated hydraulic caliper. So to replace this with this, we don't have to replace the lines, the levers, any of that. All of that stays in place. So you still have a steel cable running down to this brake, and I do have a different video on how to install these. But inside this, now you have fluid, so you get that stopping power. And some people will argue in the comments, I'm sure, saying hydraulic brakes don't really have more stopping power. All I have to say about that is modern cars have power brakes as opposed to manual brakes for good reasons. So we can leave it at that. But here, both pads move in evenly at the same time, so they stay adjusted like the full hydraulic setups. You don't have to worry about the brake switches because that's built into the lever that stays on the bike. So here's an intermediate option. If you're looking at a bike with mechanicals, but you want more stopping power, this is an easy way to make that happen. If you want it more on the bike when you buy it, then just look at bikes that come standard with some hydraulic disc brakes. Now I could go into further details about the types of brakes, about the disc rotors, all those different things. And yes, all of that matters as well, but that's more than I have time to cover in this video, because we got to keep moving. Number 4, crowdfunding. Early on, there were a lot of crowdfunding options for e-bikes. There were Saunders, the Rad Power bikes, basically every new bike company, and some still are doing it. Every once in a while, they release a new model with crowdfunding. So the question I have is, should you buy a bike from a crowdfunding platform? And I put a lot of question marks there because this is a question people want to know. Is it worth waiting for this bike? Is it going to be good? And here's what I have to say. A few years ago, I would have said you should take a serious look at some of these new e-bikes that are coming out, because there's some good deals or some good models coming out. You just have to wait a while for it to show up. But things are changing quite rapidly in the e-bike industry. I bought a bike off of a crowdfunding platform quite a while back, and it was for demo purposes and testing, and it took about a year to arrive. That is a long time to wait. And in the end, was it really that great of a deal? Honestly, no. So I would be very careful about this. There certainly could be some new models or new technology in the e-bike space that could be worth it. But all I'm going to say is there are tons of options. If you're looking for an e-bike, there's probably one that exists that you can buy and have in the next few weeks instead of the next few months or years. So should you buy a crowdfunding bike? Well, if there's a company that comes out with something and you're a loyal fan and you like what they do and they've got something new and it's amazing and you want to wait for it, maybe. But if you just want an e-bike and you want to have fun, then you can save a lot of time by buying something now. Now, number 5. Oh, did I skip the surprise? Okay, so this has nothing to do with the list here, but I wanted to mention it to all of my subscribers. I have been working on something in the background. I mentioned it in the last couple videos that there was a new format, something new coming for Bolton e-bikes, a new way to get information. And so I'm officially telling you today what that is. And that's going to be the Bolton e-bikes podcast. I've done some research. I've looked around. As far as podcasts, there isn't much on e-bikes. It's pretty sparse. So if you're not familiar with a podcast, think YouTube, but you get to listen and you don't have to watch. So if you're at work or if you're in the car and you want to enjoy more cool, awesome content about electric bikes, not just from me, but from guests and other people in the e-bike industry, go check out the Bolton e-bikes podcast. That's launching in February. I will put a link in the description so you can sign up when that comes out, and not only sign up, but you'll get a chance to win another electric bike if you go check out that link. So make sure to do that. Number 5, bike weight. How much does an e-bike weigh? This is another interesting one where there's a few different ways to look at it. Sometimes people don't care. Sometimes that's the most important thing in the world. Everybody's different. Everybody has a unique need for their electric bike. So there's no one answer that's best. Now, if every e-bike could just be made lighter, that would be great, but you have to sacrifice somewhere to get the weight down. So here's what I tell people that come by the shop, they test ride bikes, they ask, how much does this bike weigh? Well, first I just tell them what the thing weighs. So if it's 63 pounds, I tell them it's 63 pounds. There's no sense fiddling with weights or trying to make things seem what they aren't. That's just dumb. But does it really matter? I would say when you're on the bike and you're riding it, no, it doesn't make much of a difference at all when you're actually on the bike, with one exception that I could argue makes sense. And that one exception would be is if you're looking for a high-end trail bike and you want the best handling on the trails, then having less weight to throw around makes sense. So on that type of riding, yes. Now, is the average person doing trail riding where they're going off jumps and different things like that? No, at least not my customers. So if you're just doing general trail riding, riding on the road, weight is not going to be that important while you're riding the bike. It does, however, matter when you're loading the bike or lifting the bike. That's when you're going to feel the weight. So depending on your physical capability, how are you loading the bike, where are you putting it, this could matter. If you have trouble lifting up a 70-pound bike onto a bike rack, then you have a couple of options. Get a lighter bike or find a way to load the bike onto that rack easily. So pay attention to that when you're deciding how are you going to use the bike, and is there a time when you're going to lift it, and is that going to make it more difficult? Now, of course, you can remove the batteries on most e-bikes very easily. That could remove anywhere from 5 to 10 pounds right off the bat. There's some little things you can do to help maneuver them, but bike weight doesn't really matter that much when you're actually riding for most people. It does matter when you're lifting the bike. Number 6, seats. Seats are very, very subjective. So here's a seat that might come on a typical e-bike. It's relatively hard, it's kind of thin, and if you're a cyclist, maybe you're into that sort of thing. But if you're not, and you just want comfort, you might want something like this. Now, there could be some exceptions, but in general, most electric bikes use the same standard seat posts and seat rails, so any bicycle seat will fit on just about any e-bike. There's these 2 rails right here. You just unbolt the existing seat, and you clamp this one on. This one's called the Cloud 9. You can find them on Amazon for less than 30 bucks. They're rather large, as you can see. They make different styles, and they're very cushy. They've got extra springs. So here's one that I've installed on a bunch of e-bikes for people. I'll put a link in the description where you can go buy one of these if you'd like to on Amazon. But just be aware that the seat that comes on a bike is not that important, because if you want comfort, you're probably going to have to change it to something else anyway. Everybody likes something different. So there you have it. Just change it out. Very easy to do. Number 7, bike size and fit. Now, when you're talking cycling, like professional mountain bike racing or road biking, the size, the fit of the bike is extremely important. It's crucial to getting the most performance, to getting the longest endurance. And when I say endurance, I mean not just your speed or how far you can really ride, but your comfort. If the bike doesn't fit right, you're going to be straining, you're going to be moving around, and you're going to get tired faster. So how do you decide which bike is the right size? Well, when it comes to e-bikes, is the fit as crucial as it is in those cases? And this is one of those where, of course, if the bike can fit perfectly, that's best. But I think the fit should be a little bit different on an e-bike based on, once again, this is not everybody, but this is based on how most people use it. I find that a lot of people who are buying e-bikes, after they test ride a few, they will tend to buy something a hair smaller than what they might normally buy in a standard bicycle. And the reason for that is, if you're on a standard bicycle, you want to have the right leg extension, you want your knees to be in the right spot, because all of your power from your legs and your knees and your joints is going in to move that bike forward. On an e-bike, you're getting exercise, you're doing those same movements, but getting it to be perfect is not as critical because you have a motor that can help you. So the reason to get a smaller bike is typically, so it could be lighter, so that could go back to this, or it is usually because if you get something a little smaller, it can be easier to handle and get on and off. So me personally, I prefer a bike that fits just right. So I'm not getting one that's smaller. So for me, I prefer to do more mountain biking, off-road trails. I want the bike to fit well. But if you're older in age or have any physical ailments that might make it hard to get on and off, don't be afraid to change it up a little bit with the size and find whatever's the most comfortable for you to get on and off, and get a bike that you're actually going to use. Because if you buy a bike that has the right pedal extension when you get on it, but you're going to fall off when you go to stop, that's not going to be a good e-bike for you. So yes, the size and the fit is very, very important, but I do view it differently for e-bikes as I would for standard bicycles. Number 8, this is a really big one, so I left it for last. E-bike classes, watts, power, how does all of that work? And a few years ago, this was just in a few states, but it's starting to be adopted nationwide. Each year, more and more states are adopting class 1, 2, and 3 e-bike rules. So let me explain a little bit of what those are. Number 1, or class 1 e-bikes, are pedal assist bikes, so they don't have a throttle, and they're limited to 20 miles an hour. So you can't go too fast and you can't have a throttle. Makes sense. Now, certain trails, what they're doing is they're putting up signs saying only class 1 e-bikes are allowed on this trail. So if you have a higher class of e-bike, you're not supposed to ride there. Now, if we go to a class 2 e-bike also has the same limit of 20 miles an hour, but now it can have a throttle. So you have the ability to ride without pedaling if you choose to. Now, if we jump up to a class 3, the speed limit increases further to 28 miles an hour, but you're not allowed to have a throttle to do it. So to make that clear, only a class 2 e-bike is legally allowed to have a throttle. The rest of them do not. So you got pedal assist in class 1 and a faster pedal assist on a class 3. So pay attention to your local laws and trails and see if they have signs or any notifications about implementing classes of e-bikes. There's not a lot on this out there yet, but it is something that's starting to happen. Now, in this area where I'm at, it's not really happening yet, so just kind of use your best judgment. And that's what I would recommend. If there's no signs or anything stating what class of e-bike is allowed where you're riding, just don't do dumb things. Thank you again for watching another video from Bolton e-bikes. So there's 8 more things. If you haven't watched the video about 10 things you should know about an e-bike, make sure to click the link in the description or click one of these bubbles that pops up. Make sure to hit that subscribe button down in the corner. And I will be back for another video next Thursday.